What a nice way for us to start the day, but to chat to the nicest man in economics.
Where?
And we're going to talk to John as well.
There you go.
I could go through all John's various achievements. He's been the head of the TCU economics department twice, and very relevant to what we're going to be talking about today, has been the executive director of the International Confederation of Associations for Pluralism in Economics. He has authored dozens of peer-reviewed papers, and also, amongst other books, 2 books we use on our courses, which you can see if you've got a very powerful vision, just beyond my shoulder underneath the movie poster, and extremely relevant, the Contending Perspectives in Economics book, which is also the basis of one of the subjects on our degree program, which John wrote and recorded lectures for as well. So it's a great pleasure to have John with us. Thank you very much, John.
Well, thank you very much. I've really been looking forward to this. Let me glance over here again at Susan's question about, I know you've sent me a list ahead of time. I requested a list ahead of time. And so I have some things I was going to address here.
Yeah.
And Susan's question in the chat about the current US situation. I have been doing things to try to occupy myself to not pay too much attention. What I see what's going on, but my wife, she likes to see it live in real time, and I would shoot myself. And believe me, there's plenty of guns here, not in our house, but elsewhere. And what I've been spending time thinking about in this situation is the fact that I also have UK and Irish citizenship, and getting the hell out of here. But I don't know. So yeah, it's all awful. We have started a number of honestly, of support groups with some of my wife's relatives, and we're getting together with some folks. Let's see, on the 22nd of this month, there is a protest in the city of Austin, which is the capital of Texas. And Melanie insisted last night that we make hotel reservations to go down there and participate in the protest, which no one will pay any attention to, except our kids. People see these things. I just said to Melanie last night, that we're not religious, which I guess is another way of saying atheist. And so we didn't take our kids to church, but they saw you, meaning Melanie, organize protests and stuff like this. That was far more important. So anyway, it's it's pretty bad over here. So I can come back to that if you want to, or we can leave it completely alone if you want to, and we can go on to the question.
I was just thinking, John, that there's so much going on that you almost don't know what specifically to protest about.
That's exactly right. This protest is actually about public school funding in particular. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. The EPI, what is it? The Economic Policy Institute has created a distribution list where you can put your email address in there, and they will update you on the latest things that were done. And I think it also comes with a bottle of whiskey with each one, so that you can then forget what you just read. But it's unbelievable. Yeah. Well, all these questions here that I received ahead of time, and again, we can get to others as well, but we're all generally related to Contending Perspectives. So let me open by just telling you how I wrote this book, because it's really not an area of research interest for me. Exchange rates are, and business cycles are. I have a book forthcoming on business cycles, but many of you may know Edward Elgar, who was the founder of Edward Elgar, not the musician, the Edward Elgar Publishing. And I stopped by the booth one day to ask if they had a book like this that wasn't already 20 years old. And he used something of a Jedi mind trick on me, I think, because I walked away having agreed to write this book, having no interest whatsoever before he talked me into it. So anyway, he said, you ought to write that book. You used to be, head of the ICAPE, all that sort of thing. So I sat down and started writing, and several years later, here it is. And actually, my let's see here. The sixth question on my list is, and apparently we have Joseph, Susan, and Yarno to thank particularly for this list here. Let me go ahead and just skip down the number
Darren
six.
too. I left Darren Quinn as well. We have to thank.
Darren
It's
as
not
well.
written there,
Right.
but he has suggested some questions since we did them.
Oh, very good.
Quite similar to the ones on the list. So,
not surprising. Number 6 was, what was the most important thing you learned when writing your book, Contending Perspectives in Economics? The first thing was not to talk to Edward Elgar unless you've got your guard up. And the second thing was that with the book, it covers, I don't remember how many schools of thought now. And on each of the non-mainstream chapters, something I wanted to make different about this was I checked with Austrians. Is this chapter okay? I checked with Marxists. I checked with, I didn't check with Neoclassicals. That was the one school of thought I didn't say, I got a PhD in that. With Post-Keynesians, with feminists and so forth, to vet each chapter. And there were a lot of nice people. Did I come away with a respect for each group of people? Yes. Did I change my mind about anything? I really didn't. Not in the sense that, oh my God, I'm not a post-Keynesian anymore. Not from that perspective. There were some things from the Austrians I thought, oh, that's very clever. That does make more sense to think of markets that way or this way. But I didn't really change my mind about anything, but I did come away with that there are some really nice scholars out there that with people like this in the world, perhaps we can have pluralism, which brings me to question number 1. What is economic pluralism?
Well, let's take a step back. I think if somebody was coming to this event without having done much economics, maybe without knowing what a post-Keynesian economist or an Austrian school economist is, they might imagine just from the newspapers, TV, other media, that there already is pluralism in the economic narrative, because after all, Paul Krugman and Greg Mankiw, they don't agree on everything. They have quite vigorous discussions in the US. Before Donald Trump, Republicans had economists advising them, and so did Democrats. And there's that old joke about there being, if you have 10 economists in a room, there'll be 11 opinions because Keynes will have 2. Isn't pluralism something that we already have?
No, absolutely, positively not, I'm afraid. And let me define it first, because that was like the first question that came up. So I decided I'll just see what I said in the book, because I didn't remember, because I haven't taught this class in a while. Let's see, I told myself page 8. Basically the idea that there's a respectful interchange of ideas among people from different schools of thought. That doesn't mean we all have to agree with each other. It doesn't mean we're all going to come up with oh, I guess we're all Marxists now, or whatever. It's the respect that is missing. And here's the problem. If you are taking a class on astronomy, should you also be asked to learn astrology? Well, we would all say, well, no, that's just ridiculous. Well, that's the neoclassical, that's the mainstream view of other schools of thought. We say, well, you want to hear different opinions? We'd like to have different opinions expressed. And they say, well, sure, if they make sense, but we're not going to put astrology in here. And Marxism, post-Keynesianism, to some of them, Austrianism, feminist economics, to them, those are astrology. So that's what we're trying to break down here is, I put a challenge in the front of the book. I challenge you to get to the end of the book and not think to yourself, wow, for every school of thought somewhere. You say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's really interesting. Now, does that make me a Marxist or an Austrian? No, but no, it's an interesting idea. So the respect isn't there. And when you bring up Krugman and Mankiw, they're in the same school of thought. It would be kind of like, I don't know, this is a terrible joke. This man drives up to this bridge and he sees another man standing on the bridge about to jump. And he yells out, don't do it, don't do it. Oh, are you a Christian? He said, well, yes, I am. He said, well, me too. He said, are you a Protestant? Oh, yeah, me too. Baptist? Uh-huh, me too. Baptist Convention of 1848 or 1843? And the guy says 1843. So he pushes the guy off the bridge and yells, heretic. because they're that far apart from each other. Well, that's Mankiw and the other guy you mentioned.
Or from our older, for those of us that are a little bit older, such as ourselves, as teenagers, we might remember Paul Samuelson and Milton Friedman.
Right.
Yeah.
Same school of thought. I remember I had a colleague of mine, a really nice man, neoclassical, really nice man. He read an article for me that I was going to publish about explaining post-Keynesian economics to neoclassicals, to mainstreamers. And he was like, I can't believe you're calling monetarists and, let's say, new Keynesians as being the same school of thought. And I said, well, Baptists and Catholics would argue that they're very different perspectives. But if I'm a Buddhist, I'm like, yeah, y'all look a lot alike to me. So that's, the excellent point, Stephen. The conflicts, the controversy, the discussions we see in the real world are not among people who disagree about basic issues, which I can talk about and I'm prepared to talk about, because somebody asked what's the main difference between neoclassical school of thought and the other schools of thought. But they're not differing on the main methodological points and the main assumptions, the sort of core assumptions about which we don't even raise a question.
So what is it that distinguishes a neoclassical economist from somebody else?
I hit his head on the table as I picked him up. Well, that's an excellent question, Stephen. And I don't know, I've obviously thought about this a lot, and you sort of try to keep pushing down, and what's the basic thing? And I think a big part of it is when you're thinking about building a model, building an explanation, you have to come up with premises. An argument is simply a series of premises that lead to a conclusion, and that's what all theories and models and so forth are. And sometimes your conclusion becomes the premise of a new argument and so forth. So it's a very basic question. Where did you get your premises? And you can get premises from intuition. I can sit back by the fireplace and think to myself, let's see, if I was an entrepreneur, what would I be seeking to do? Profit maximize, or you can do a survey of entrepreneurs. You can look at the real world and try to decide, okay, what is it that they actually do, and then base my model on that. Obviously, some of each is appropriate. There are some things we simply can't observe. And there are some things that, we probably ought to go out and see how they actually do it. Neoclassicism leans heavily towards, and it's a big school of thought. This is like saying all Catholics believe X. Okay, well, there's a lot of Catholics, all right? But if I'm going to narrow it down to one thing that I think causes that to branch off in the wrong direction, it's going to be this emphasis on intuition as being the place, on sort of silent reflection as being the place where I come up with premises for my arguments. There was a famous quote from a neoclassical economist, I think it was Ely, I can't remember now, who said years ago at a conference, if economists were asked to study the horse, they wouldn't go look at horses. They would sit in their offices and think to themselves, what would I do if I were a horse? Now, again, there's a place for all these things, all right? There's a place for all these things, but they lean so heavily on the side. I mentioned one of my main areas is exchange rates. Their models have worked horribly for years and years, and so you need to ask yourself, well, how am I going to fix my model? Well, if only there was somewhere where I could look, to come up with what's wrong with it. Well, for us in post-Keynesian economics and many other schools of thought, it's the real world. We look at the real world and say, okay, obviously our perceptions are biased, but that's true whether you're looking at the real world or just sitting in your office. You're biased either way, all right? And so for them, they keep coming back to, and this is where it kind of wedges its way in, the free market bias. Well, let's see, I guess markets would have to be efficient and people would have to be rational, wouldn't they? And then they'll do studies to find that that's not really true. And I'm sure if we're sitting at a bar with Greg Mankiw, they could probably get us to agree on a lot of stuff, but that doesn't end up in the textbook. Somehow, have you seen that cartoon? I think I used it in the class, where these cave people are building a what would you call it? It's like a seesaw, but and they have one cave person standing here, and there's a canyon over here, and a couple of them drop a rock right here, and the cave person falls right into the canyon. And they say, and they sort of look down, and they say, well, the theory's sound though, and that's kind of what you end up with the neoclassical economists. Many things. So I mentioned that the exchange rate stuff. The models were working so poorly that they started actually looking at real world surveys of currency dealers to see what their forecasts were. But it was fascinating. Every time they would do so in an article, they would apologize first. They would say, well, you know, I know we don't use surveys. I know that's not really very reliable, but it's all I had. And so, well, so I think if I flip that around then and give you a contrast, what I think of as post-Keynesian economics emphasizes observation over intuition. If the model, if you input historical inputs and you don't get historical outputs, or they're way off, there's something wrong. So how do I fix this? Well, I go back and I try to make, see what thing in the real world, because we have to simplify, of course. There's no way we can make a model that is the real world. And so not only is there the emphasis on observation over intuition as opposed to the neoclassical one, but also markets are just a tool to those people in my school of thought. That, hey, if it works, that's great. Use the market. We have social problems that can be solved by different mechanisms, and there's nothing more unique about the market than there is about a hammer. If I'm a carpenter, man, I got a whole set of different tools here, and a hammer might be great for lots of stuff. But I'm not a pro hammer carpenter. Are you pro hammer or anti hammer would be a foolish question to ask, but pro market or anti market is very common. Anyway, I'll shut up there and see what.
So how come, John? I mean, we both know. I know more neoclassical economists than I know post-Keynesians and heterodox economists, just because there are so many more of them. And I spent 20 years working in what's supposed to be an Ivy League university, and is a great university. But there's 25 economists there, I think. And now I'm not there anymore. There are 25 neoclassical economists. Yeah. How come they have come to dominate the profession?
That is, yeah, I should have already addressed that. That's exactly. By the way, the same thing is going to happen in my department. Right now, every student is required to take Contending Perspectives in economics to get an econ major. And that wasn't even my idea. It was suggested by one of our Austrians. But when I'm gone, I'm sure they're going to bury that as soon as they can. But anyway, so how did it come to dominate? Well, and that was actually one of the questions here about pluralism. At any rate, there was, as I understand it, and I'm an amateur historian of economic thought. I mean, I have a field in it, but I haven't really researched in it. But up until about World War II, there was some interchange among different schools of thought, although there weren't that many different schools of thought, I guess, either. But yeah, there was some interchange. But a couple of things really happened, especially after, well, I've seen two major explanations. One is that during World War II, we suddenly in the US have full employment. Well, some of the neoclassical focuses work well under full employment because they're already assuming it exists to start with. So a model that already assumes what's going on in the real world. And there were also a lot of uses of neoclassical economics for production and maximizing, with limited resources and so forth. Where should we bomb next? That sort of thing. And so the economics profession had taken a black eye because of the Great Depression, and now here the neoclassicals are coming up with some solutions. But I don't, as I said, I've read a couple of things. That one's interesting. I don't think it's as big a deal as the second thing, and that was what do you call it? When we're persecuting everybody that's a Marxist. There's a name for that. The Red Scare.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Yeah, the Red Scare. Sorry. And I mean, I found, so in the second edition of the book, I found some really good stuff to back up that particular argument. And if you weren't, I mean, we got the world between the U.S. and the Soviets. And if you weren't clearly on the U.S. side, if you weren't pro-market all the way, then you could get fired, tenure be damned. There was a really good story of a couple of economists who came up from University of Texas in Austin to Dallas to come to an open meeting to talk about this horribly socialistic idea of either an 8-hour workday, maybe it was a 40-hour work week, which, is just a terrible idea that they'd come up with in the FDR administration. And they wanted to speak as well, open meeting. They were told they couldn't. They said a few words at the end of it, and when they got back to Austin, they were fired. I found some testimony from Congress about, hey, we found a bunch of communists, and one of them was a kindergarten teacher. I was like, this is how deep down it was going. So we have this, does that mean that all neoclassical economists are right-leaning? No, a lot of them consider themselves, at least as far as politics in the US goes, relatively left-leaning, but you kept your mouth shut, all right? And you're not gonna have a big career. Now, I think the biggest problem that created was the journal rankings, that everyone starts, are some journals better than others? Clearly they must be. I was once editor of a journal that I'll say no more. There are some journals that are better than others. All right.
And that's always going to be subjective, though, isn't it? Any journal.
It is. And it's going to be by school of thought. It's going to be very much by school of thought. And so I was almost denied a position recently because I was told by the committee that I didn't really publish in very good journals. Well, I can remember sitting in my office in grad school thinking, oh my God, I wonder what it's like to publish in the Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics. That was to me, in the Journal of Economic Issues. And that's where almost all of my stuff is published. And so I pointed out, and to their credit, they changed their mind. I said, yeah, if you're going to rate me as a Marxist economist, I'm not going to rate well. As an Austrian economist, I'm not going to rate well. As a neoclassical one, and vice versa for other people. You're telling me, and I think this is what really drove it home, you're telling me I have to believe X, Y, and Z or I can't get promoted. They backed off. So anyway, the journal ranking thing, I have seen extremely restrictive lists at institutions where you're not Harvard. I mean, it's not like, that you have to publish in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, which is supposedly the top neoclassical journal and so forth. So this, it keeps coming up in our department. So far, we have totally avoided any ranking system whatsoever. Everything counts equally. The neoclassicals are wanting a ranking system. And so as soon as we do that, then because, as you said, ranking systems are subjective, and the dominant school of thought is going to put out the ranking system. So that's going to prevent people from being promoted, from being hired in the first place. So I think that's the biggest obstacle.
That's even more true at, God love them, at Adelaide Uni. And as you know, we had a great friend, the late Jeff Harcourt, a post-Keynesian icon. I would argue, certainly in the top two Australian economists, along with Trevor Swan in the history of economic thought. Adelaide University has rooms named after him, lectureships, visiting professorships. Stephanie came once, although there was a revolution when we asked Stephanie Kelton, but she came anyway. But Joseph Stiglitz came, Paul Krugman came, icons of neoclassical economics. They raised money in his name. But Jeff used to say to me, if he was applying for a job at the University of Adelaide these days, he wouldn't even be shortlisted.
Yeah. I couldn't have gotten tenure somewhere else, let alone I'm in a chaired professorship now, but it's only because we don't use a journal ranking system. I don't know what we're going to do. Well, Trump is going to wipe the slate clean for the planet, and then we'll see what happens after that.
One thing we're going to do is we're going to try running courses like we do and give people an alternative perspective, because the triumph of neoclassical economics has not been based on any scientific or empirical superiority over other schools, has it? No.
I don't think so. No, and I mean, obviously, that's an argument that, but speaking of great thinkers in our school of thought, Jamie Galbraith, I was at a conference of his one time, and it was at the point where we're all sitting around drinking. And I said, can the economics discipline be saved? And he said, no. So, okay, all right, well, anyway. And then, well, what can we do? And he said stuff like this. And he pointed, he had a bunch of policymakers there and things like you guys are doing, where you're not necessarily picking from people who have already self-selected into economics, into the way economics is right now. See, my first econ class was from an institutionalist economist, and I didn't know it was from an institutionalist, and I thought it was fascinating. And then when I got to grad school and we started doing all the hardcore neoclassical models in the class I thought was going to be my favorite was macro. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? But then I got lucky. I got hired at a place where the department chair was an institutionalist from the University of Texas. One of the other senior faculty members was a Marxist from UMass Amherst. So I just got lucky. So anyway, and by the way, one of the questions that was asked was, aren't we arguing that neoclassical economics is misleading, and isn't this anti-pluralist? It's an excellent question. And I used to come across this when I was doing that ICAPE, the International Confederation of Associations for Pluralism in Economics, right? And the way that association worked, everybody, basically our big event every year at the big econ conference, we would sponsor a table with the money from people's, and we only associations joined our association, not individuals, but from their subscriptions. We would sponsor a table where everyone could put their materials out, right? And then we'd have a board meeting. And I saw Fred Lee's name come up here a minute ago. There he is. And Fred and I would always be against each other on this one, because I would always say, well, if it's for pluralism, we should also allow neoclassicals. And Fred, if you knew Fred, hell no, they're the ones ruining everything. All right. So, and I know where he was coming from, but no, I have learned some interesting things in neoclassical economics, as much as I have in Austrian, and but we're not against neoclassicism. We're against their domination of the discipline so that nobody else can be heard. So we could be having this conversation and Marxism dominated, the discipline, and didn't allow any other opinions to be expressed, quickly dismissed them. And so, that's the situation we find ourselves in.
Is it relevant that neoclassical economics emerged in the first place, at least in part, as a counter to the threat of Marxist political economy, and ever since then, almost the whole time, has almost entirely been supportive of the status quo?
Yeah, I mean, I'll actually not waste everyone's time with a long answer. Yeah, I think that's pretty close to right. And I don't think they, I've seen people post, it's a conspiracy. They're out to support, the neoclassical economists are out to support capitalism. I don't think so. There may be some, but I think that we have, by the time we've narrowed down to PhDs, we have picked out true believers. And the friend I was talking about earlier, who's the neoclassical, is very left-leaning. He just had, and this is something that needed to be brought up, he just had never heard anything else.
Absolutely.
He'd never heard another, because that's why we require our students to hear these other views. If that's the only thing you've ever heard, and I'm interested in economics, and apparently that's the way it works, and that's the way my colleague sees the world, then what can we do to?
That was true of me. It's not even. I was at uni in the early 80s. You would have thought, particularly conservative institution, the London School of Economics, but all I ever learned was neoclassical economics. There was nothing at all other than that, and I only became aware that there were other approaches. I'd heard of, I think, your former professor, Paul Davidson. I'd heard of his name, but to be perfectly honest, the guys there thought he was slightly kooky.
Oh yeah.
And even though he was a great, towering figure, as I now know, but I didn't learn anything about heterodox economics until by chance I ended up in Adelaide, where we had Colin Rogers, and sometimes Jeff Harcourt would pop in. That's the first time I knew there was anything other than neoclassical economics. And I'd been teaching in a university for more than 10 years by then.
Right, right. Well, what happened to me was at that moment when I was thinking to myself, what have I done? I went to my graduate school office and I looked down on my desk and there was a book called A Guide to Post-Keynesian Economics, which clearly was the hand of God, but actually turned out to be the hand of Paul Kubik, one of my colleagues. And so I asked around, says, anybody know whose book this is? And nobody answered. So I started reading it. It's like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. It was all about the real world, the real world, the real world. And you know, that's not to say, again, as I mentioned earlier, models have to be simplifications. They have to be, because that's why it's a model and the real world's too complicated. But your guide to what my model should look like ought to be what's outside my window right now, which, by the way, is a couple of Trump supporters over there. I'm not sure about the people across the street, but I'm sure with the signs we put up in our yard all the time, we're on an enemy's list. But anyway.
Well, you're reminding me of Colin Rogers again now. He used to say, to find your way across New Zealand, you need a map of New Zealand, which is a model, but it better have something in common with New Zealand. It's not going to be all that useful.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. Well, let me jump down, if I may, to one of the Kent had, and I'm sorry I haven't been keeping up with the chat very much. But
Gabby will have been keeping an eye on it.
Oh, okay. Kent said here, because I was just talking about this, you said in the subject that institutionalism almost became the dominant school of thought in the United States. Yeah, up until World War II, there were, you know, the presidents of the American Economic Association who were institutionalists. There were the National Bureau of Economic Research, which remains the institution that decides whether or not we're in an expansion or recession, was co-founded by an institutionalist. Well, okay.
Describe an institutionalist, John.
Okay.
What does it take to be an institutionalist?
Yeah, you're right. I should have done. I'll just start reading. Institutionalists are well, the branch that I'm most familiar with from Thorstein Veblen.
Yeah.
And the basic idea. Okay, I'll narrow it down this way: that Homo sapien cultures and behavior is actually really important to economics. That we aren't all born as capitalists. That we have values that are handed down by our culture. And the thing that attracted me to institutionalism, and many of my instructors at Tennessee, University of Tennessee, were institutionalists. I just didn't know it until later. But the idea that most attracted me to this school of thought was that you can break down values into two groups. There are instrumental values that are based on logic and reason and are experimental. I'm happy to change the way I'm doing things. For example, I need to change the oil in my car every 3,000 to 5,000 miles. Why do I do that? Because my father did it and my father's father before him. No. Because if I don't do that, the car breaks down. Oh, we've come out with a new oil that you never have to change. Okay, I'll do that. You know, I'm not wedded to any particular type of behavior. So there are, you know, many such values in a society that are based on logic and reason, experimental, and are determined appropriate by whether or not they achieve the goal in question. Then there are things that are ceremonial, and that's just crap that we made up. And a lot of it has to do with invidious distinction. I'm better than you. The color of skin, where you put the knives and forks, who cares? But this indicates class. There's a lot of class distinctions in there, and people will stick to these ceremonial values through thick and thin, even though there's no underlying logic. Now, Homo sapiens cannot escape that because we are social animals. And we want to be with other Homo sapiens. And how do we express this kinship? We share values and we share behaviors. Very important to us because we're social animals, right? Unlike what you would hear from other schools of thought, like the Austrians, the Neoclassicals, where it's, oh, we're all individuals. And well, if you chose to do that, you just chose to do it. No, that's not the way it really works. Right? And so we can't escape ceremony being part of a Homo sapien. But my gosh, it's unbelievable how many things we do that are just ceremonial and are either contributing to well, I mean, good Lord, just look at the United States right now. And I read a book recently about how race and slavery, and I don't know, I was saying to Melanie the other day, I don't know if it's worse in the US than it is in other Western countries, but how race and the institution of slavery, which was here when the country was founded and for another 100 years, how it is just a major part of the value structure in this country. And so institutionalism says that's worthy of economic study. Neoclassicism says, oh, that's for sociologists. That's not for us. Are you kidding me? The thing that by itself explains 90% of the wealth disparity in this country. We don't even have to have, marginal productivity theory thing. Just what color are you? Oh, okay. All right. Well, you're probably poor and you're probably rich. So, that's not economics. That explains so much of income and wealth distribution. So institutionalists come from the perspective that the first thing you have to figure out about a society is what are the rules? What are the rules of the game? And are these rules of the game contributing to social welfare or not? And that's
it's an evolutionary perspective, or sort of co-evolutionary perspective. Yes. On the economy. The economy and culture evolve together over time, and cause and effect goes in both directions.
Right. And we don't know which way it's going. There's not any sort of prediction, as you might have in some Marxist circles, at any rate, we're going to go through, capitalism and then socialism and then communism. And we don't know. And another horrifying thing about institutionalism is, hey, we could go backwards. And here is our empirical evidence now.
Well, absolutely. You're already, I think, explaining to people, if people were not aware before, how much broader a perspective you have on the world and on especially current events in the US if you are not a narrowly neoclassical economist to the exclusion of everything else. What about post-Keynesians? Because post-Keynesian economics and institutional economics overlap.
They do, and it's interesting because they have very, very different, I guess, origin stories. That, you've got post-Keynesian economics, and there are many varieties. You can have a Koleskian, a Neo-Ricardian, and so forth, but I'm more of a Keynes. I've got my copy of the General Theory right over there because I was just reading it. And so, mostly from Keynes, 1936. And he starts off as a mainstream economist. Now, what a mainstream economist is in 36 is very different from what it is in 1976, but he starts off as a mainstream economist. So whereas institutionalism evolves, by the way, institutionalism is the only truly American school of thought, which is neither good nor bad, but it is kind of interesting that this one evolved here based on some concepts other than that Darwin guy that were largely American. Anyway, Keynes is coming from the mainstream view, and to some extent, and I guess a quick way to understand post-Keynesian is that there isn't the assumption that the economy is always fixing itself, that unemployment automatically goes away. And that is so because Keynes argues that the world is, and this seems like such a minor thing, and it took me years to get my head around it completely, because the world is uncertain. And Keynes says there's risk and there's uncertainty. Risk is when you go to the casino and you spin the roulette wheel. I know all the possible outcomes. I know the odds of every outcome, right? So that's just risky. Uncertain is, I don't know the odds. I don't know the possible outcomes. And he says the real world is uncertain, right? And then he says, all right, so why would anyone undertake an investment project in a world where there's really no way to come up with a sort of mathematically objective forecast? Because neoclassical economics, when it deals with questions of, but then they'll call it uncertainty, but they're really talking about risk of investment. They're like, oh, okay, well, investors see these three possibilities, this percentage on this one, this percentage on this one, this percentage on this one, and they build their most of their examples.
Yeah,
like
Paul Davidson used to talk about actuarial perfect foresight.
Right, that's right. Yeah, the entrepreneur in the neoclassical model doesn't know the future, but they know it in an actuarial sense. Whereas in Keynes, it's like, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. Now, obviously, there are different degrees of that. But why is that important? that's important because now we don't have a guarantee of this investment process. I'm actually writing a paper on this right now. The investment process is not driven by interest rates, like the neoclassicals say that, well, there'll be more investment if you lower interest rates and less investment if you raise interest rates. No, the real problem is the way these people create forecasts in this uncertain world. Because easiest to give you an example, the economy's starting on an upturn, let's say, and everyone's fairly still depressed because we've just come out of the recession, right? But a lot of investment projects will have been put on hold during the recession because, well, we're in a recession. Let's say you have a store that has 5 checkout lanes and one of the checkout lanes breaks. Well, we'll work with 4. Oh no, another one broke. We'll work with 3. But eventually you're going to have to replace that capital. And capital investment is an injection into the economy that'll cause it to grow, which of course is bad if we start talking about climate. So let's leave that alone, leave the climate part alone for now. So the people start replacing worn out capital. And so the economy starts to take off. And this is a surprise to people. And this is really important in a world where you don't have these actuarial tables of the future. Surprises are really important. They're like, oh, wow, things are going, well, shoot, we should invest too. So then we have this long period of expansion. I mean, there's no calendar to it, but 5 years of an economic expansion, at least since after World War II. And eventually, however, and this is the fun part and the exciting part. I don't know. Sometimes I feel bad. I feel like a volcanologist must feel when a volcano explodes and kills a bunch of people. Oh, that was fascinating. So the recession part is fascinating. All right. So we're going up here to the top of the expansion, and people are finishing their projects. Oh, we got another restaurant built. Good. We added on to the factory. Good. Now, how much money do you make from building a restaurant? Nothing. And you go into debt. You're not excited about that. You're excited about, let's open the restaurant. All right. Well, stop investing and open the restaurant and lay off all the construction workers and the people who'd supplied stuff. So, and Koleski talks about this too. As we get to the top of the expansion, more and more firms are reaching the point of, okay, we've got enough capital now. And we're still optimistic. We're still thinking this is going to be great. Only then when they realize there's nobody coming to the door because us and our colleagues laid off a bunch of people, and it's a negative surprise. And Keynes talks about the fact that their air of optimism, they initially thought that they would do well up here, is replaced by an air of pessimism because they're scared, because they don't have an actuarial table, and it's much safer not to spend than to spend. And so the economy collapses down the other way. There's Keynes.
You mentioned the Austrian school, and Austrian school economists and post-Keynesians both talk about uncertainty. But politically speaking, they are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And in terms of the role of government, they're on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right. Yeah, I have a good friend who is an Austrian, really nice man. I'll tell you, we're Facebook friends, and he is struggling right now. What has happened in this country is just killing him. And it's been very interesting. He's also talking about, I've got friends at the Hoover Institute. I've got friends at so he's like, I can't believe my friends are involved with this. Anyway, it's very sad. But he came down and spoke at TCU. Rob Garnett, one of my colleagues, who's a well-known heterodox economist, he had invited him down. But this fellow sought me out and said, hey, us Austrians and you post-Keynesians have a lot in common. But it seems like we Austrians talk about the economy when it works well, and you post-Keynesians talk about it when it breaks down. And there's something to that. I'm kind of more interested in the plane crash than I am the 100 flights that went fine. I was like, I want to know why the plane crashed. But where they employ uncertainty is in a different place. They employ it in trying to understand why the market is such a great thing. I am a stumbling, bumbling human, and I'm trying to figure out what my preferences are. Do I want to buy a little thing of tissues or a pen or whatever? And so the market allows me to experiment and sort of figure out what's probably best for me, although I never really know. So the market is a good way it creates signals for us. I'm trying to decide between these two, right? But this one's more expensive. Okay, I'll take this one. The market created a signal, all right, that I could follow. So they use it to explain why the market is so great. Post-Keynesians use the uncertainty to explain why the market's going to break down.
But some of their view of why markets are so great go back to the roots they share with neoclassical economics and the axiom that people basically, if not, they don't like the maths, but essentially optimizes. The other thing, am I being unfair to Austrian school economists, or do they see, you use the plane crash metaphor, do they see plane crashes as good things? Creative destruction.
Yeah. Maybe not a plane crash.
Yeah, that's an inappropriate, particularly given recent. I do apologize.
Like so the destruction of the railroad industry by interstate trucking, something like that. That's, and somebody asked me, is MMT different, modern money theory, different from post-Keynesian? Not to me. But that doesn't
not
mean
to me either, John. But we both have people that would disagree with us vehemently.
I know, and it comes down to definitions. How are you going to define what a school of thought is? All right. So, and the way I define it, MMT becomes part of post-Keynesian economics. And I remember when I was doing the second edition of this book, one of my colleagues said, "Hey, you should do a whole new chapter on MMT." I was like, "It's just part of the post-Keynesian chapter." But I mean, if you define a school of thought differently, then sure, it could be a different chapter. I don't really get hung up on that. I will say this, and I know I've told you this, Stephen, and probably Gabby too. Years ago, back when I actually did something other than post my dinner on Facebook and actually had discussions there, somebody said to me, "How long have you been into MMT?" And I said, "What does that stand for?" I didn't know what it stood for. And if you don't know much about modern money theory, you've got Stephanie Kelton, and I've known her since she got her PhD. Pavlina Chernova, I've known her since she was a grad student. Randy Ray, I've known him since he got his PhD. I've known all these people for years. These were friends. I didn't know they were calling it something else. I just thought it was like, this is the way you do economics properly.
Well, it didn't used to be called something else, to be fair. I think it was somebody commenting on Bill Mitchell's blog one day that came up with that name. I couldn't tell you who came up with the name.
Oh, I don't know. Are you asking me?
No, I don't know. It was.
Yeah.
Randy likes to call it modern money theory, of course, because of Keynes and the treatise on money and money having been modern for 4,000 years.
I had to. I asked him to if he wouldn't mind reading an article for me that had talked about MMT in there, and that was one of the changes he recommended. So I went back through and changed all modern monetary theory to modern money theory.
What about, I mean, if we haven't mentioned some of the other schools. You have a chapter now on ecological economics, which is fantastic to see. But there are chapters of the book on feminist economics and Marxist political economy. Maybe, is it possible to give a quick distinctive insight from each of those schools of thought?
No. Next question. Oh, yeah, okay, all right, I'll give you a shot.
I know Marxists don't always get on with feminists, and for example, why is that?
Well, let me approach it this way. Like I said, this was really hard to write. It's really hard to write somebody else's school of thought when you know over your shoulder you're going to be asking somebody from that school of thought to read it at some point. So anyway, for the Marxist chapter, I went through and oh my God, what's his name? I can picture him. Real nice man. Well, it was who read that chapter for me? Here we go. It was Andrew Kleinman. Andrew Kleinman. I don't know if anybody knows Andrew, but okay. So, and I would say this to Andrew's face. I was scared to send it to him because Andrew is not gonna hold back. And so I was actually going to send it to somebody else, but it was the semester that Fred Lee was really ill, and he was having to cover Fred's classes too. So okay, well I can't send it to him. So anyway, I said to Melanie, we were going to bed one night. I said, I guess I got to send it to Andrew. So I did, and I got back 6 single-spaced pages of what I had done wrong. And so after about a week, I worked up the courage to actually read the whole thing, and he was dead on. I mean, he provided citations for everything. It was really, really helpful to me. But the reason I bring up Andrew at all is well, other than the funny story you've already heard, is that his first response to me was, "I'm not even sure Marxism exists anymore." He said, it's just, sort of gone out in all different directions and so forth. So that I thought that was interesting. So, and something that the Marxists have that other schools of thought don't have, there's Marxist literature, there's Marxist art, there's Marxist sociology. We don't really have post-Keynesian sociology or post-Keynesian art. Oh, look, another painting of Keynes. And so I don't know how we would do that. So it's certainly a much broader perspective. And I guess the labor theory of value would be the thing that I would latch onto there. But then you don't even have to have the labor theory of value to be a Marxist. There's a really nice article by Jeff Hodgson on Marx without the labor theory of value. So, it's was certainly something that I found interesting.
Hodgson is an institutionalist.
Yeah, he is now. And for me, Marxism is too much rooted in David Ricardo. But again, you don't have to stick with that version of Marxism. With all these schools of thought, ooh, that's a good idea. I'll pull that out and bring this over here and use it there. So, that's being unfair of me to say that, well, it's all old stuff. Well, no, it's not. It's not. You can apply it elsewhere. You mentioned the ecological chapter, and that was the chapter I added on the second edition. I wanted to do it on the first one. And I didn't realize I was making a punny joke here, but I ran out of energy. I literally ran out of energy, and I didn't have the energy to write the ecological chapter. So when they asked me to do another version, I was like, okay, this time I'm doing the ecological chapter. It was the most depressing thing I have ever done in my entire life. I got in touch with Clive Spash, who's in Austria now. He's an Australian. And he's done fantastic work. And I'd met him at a conference before. And then, what's that other man's name? He's at Berkeley, and his name is Richard Norgaard. Done some fantastic stuff. We ended up emailing back and forth. I'm really depressed today. What about you? I'm really depressed too. And so the only thing that would keep us going is we say, but my students seem really smart. And my students seem more aware of what's going on. So maybe they can fix things. I don't know. But anyway, so that chapter was a real
I do know a buoyant ecological economist. If you want feedback from a happy ecological, Josh Farley at Vermont, who's always full of energy and
that's hilarious.
Yes, despite the circumstances we're faced with.
Right. The feminist chapter was the last one in the first edition that I had somebody check for me. The first chapter I had somebody check was the institutionalist chapter. Paul Dale Bush did it for me, and he loved it. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm a genius. I can't wait to send all these other chapters out to people. And then, of course, I got the one back from Andrew Kleiman. And then I got back the comments on the feminist chapter. It was Gillian Hewitson, who I believe is an Australian, and Janet Peterson, who just won the Veblen Commons Award from the Association for Evolutionary Economics, which for institutionalists is like the Nobel Prize. I don't know which one of them said, John, I'm sorry, but I have to tell you, I fundamentally disagree. I was like, oh, crap. And it was the last chapter, too. I was so close to being done. In my defense, what I had said originally, I read somewhere else. I didn't make it up myself, but it was that, well, feminist economics is really Marxist economics or institutionalist economics talking about gender. They were like, no, it's a different methodological approach. And so they gave me a bunch of stuff to read. I fixed it, and they said, okay, I like it now. So that's why you have people read it, even though it's horribly painful. But I will never forget that. And I try to tell my students, especially in classes where I'm grading their writing, and grading writing is much more personal than grading an exam. No, sorry, general theory was 1936, not 1937. Wrong. As opposed to, this doesn't make sense, this paragraph here. That's much more personal. And so I like them to know, yeah, I get wrecked over the coals too. As a matter of fact, I just got, I better not say too much in case somebody here is the referee, but I got probably the worst negative review of an article that didn't reject it outright in my 38 years as a professor, and the referee was right. you know, we've been encouraged to fix it and send it back, but I like the students to know that just because it's hard being graded on your writing. Anyway, that.
Well, thanks, John. Gabby, are there any questions that you've picked up that we haven't?
Oh, look, there's probably tons that we've missed because there is such a vibrant chat with
I can ask another one, otherwise.
Extra columns there. Well, I think just from my point of view, I do think there's so much more to be said about the ecological side and the need to stop using so much resources that we've gone way beyond our planetary boundaries, as all of you, I'm sure, know. And that is like, that could take a whole nother.
That's part of our mission. We really set this up in part to drag MMT and even post-Keynesian economics and ecological economics together.
Right.
And a great contributor to that, and the main author of a paper which I made a virtually no contribution to, really, Mark Diesendorf, is in the in the audience with us. A really good recent paper critiquing neoclassical economics, and a big problem that we have with neoclassical economics is the way that it treats the natural environment, and to me, what makes me angry, the angriest that I ever get as far as neoclassical economics is concerned, is William Nordhaus receiving the Nobel Prize for his work on integrated assessment models and climate change, and saying that 4 degrees of global warming is optimal. Well, that's what he used to say. When
well, as long as you're inside a building, right? I mean, you know, as long as you're inside. Okay.
Yeah. Well, our late friend Will Steffen used to say, actually, large mammals won't survive over a large part of the planet if we go that far. Yes. Was that a difficult chapter to write? And you just added that one. I have read the chapter, and I saw it. It has drawn on Clive Splash, who's a very eminent figure. You even mentioned that their journal, Ecological Economics, has become somewhat, I don't like to use the word infected, but somewhat colonized by neoclassical economics in recent times.
I don't know. They were all hard to write.
and institutional economics. We have new institutional economics. That seems to be like neoclassical colonization.
Yeah.
New Keynesian economics. Why is it that they take, or neoclassical economics seems to swallow up areas of heterodox thought and sort of
I've got a book over there that my daughter, who has a PhD in linguistics, recommended to me on, you know, and she does Native American languages, and so she knows colonization in a much more direct sense. And it's all about, you know, one school of thought colonizing the other school of thought, and I don't know. I'll tell you. When somebody's presenting a paper, I saw this written down once as a positive about the economics discipline. Somebody said, boy, when I'm in a scholarly session, if there's an economist in the audience, even if they don't know anything about the topic, they'll weigh in on it anyway. That's not necessarily a good thing. And so, you know, as a consequence, I think that's right, though. You know, we had all this figured out a long time ago. And since we don't use real world evidence to vet what we're doing, I'm sure I'm right.
Hey, they have tried to colonize other social sciences as well.
Right, absolutely. Mark, I think you were going to say something earlier.
No, I guess our paper wasn't so much in your very tolerant spirit of other areas. It was it is a severe critique of neoclassical economics, and it's basically saying it's totally unscientific, but we didn't frame it quite that way, because then we would have to get into all the history and philosophy of science, into the definitions of what is science. So we've framed it a little bit more subtly about that. But certainly, I was trained as a theoretical physicist, and so I feel very confident in arguing that neoclassical economics is totally foreign. Its approach is totally foreign to the approach in the physical sciences, and it is impertinent, we would say, for neoclassical economics to even liken itself to physics, because economics, the laws, the so-called laws it describes, are of an entirely different status to physical laws, like the conservation of energy and momentum.
Yeah. And that paper, Mark is the lead author of, Gabby has just shared a link to in the chat, by the way. Yes, great. Absolutely. I obviously concur very much with Mark. I sometimes have agreed when Colin Rogers has said in Australia, and John's not going to agree with me here, I think that a great supply side measure in Australia would be to close down all the neoclassical economics departments in Australian universities. But that doesn't seem to be necessarily in the spirit of pluralism. It's more a friendly.
Well, okay, well, what if we close down half of them, or 2/3, and then we open so. And Mark, my first major was physics.
That's great.
And I quit it pretty soon because I realized that the reason I was majoring in physics is because I wanted to be an astronaut. And really, that's not the route to becoming an astronaut. It would have been more of a jet fighter pilot, test pilot. So then I went to political science, and then I found economics after that. Yeah, it's all really bad, and I want to move out of this country, but I'm not sure that it's just going to be expensive to have to leave here.
If you don't mind me saying so, John, if it doesn't seem, I mean, this is absolutely sincere. You are one of the best economists that I know. And I think that's got something to do with not just your technical skills and your depth of knowledge in post-Keynesian economics, your research in international finance. It's to do with your attitude to pluralism.
Well, you must not know very many economists, but
I know quite a few. Some of the ones you know as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I do get taken advantage of by people. I mean, I tend to be, oh, sure, I'll bet that person's telling the truth. And so I have to, that's why Melanie is in charge of all our finances and everything else that's actually important in our life. And it's like I want to tell you personal stories, but oh, did you ever see this? You guys got The Simpsons in other countries, right? That was one of America's greatest exports. He
has a PhD in The Simpsons.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Yeah, there's hardly a picture of our girls when they were little, they're twins, where the Simpsons aren't on in the background. Anyway, Homer decides to teach an adult extension course at the local university, and it's not going well. And then he says, Marge said it would be like this. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, ooh, a personal story. Students love to hear about your personal life. They know Melanie's, I think she's still here. I may have said this more quietly. They know her GPA, her first quarter in college. They know that she turned me down when I asked her out for a date, so I never called her again. And then she had to call me, all this kind of stuff. So anyway, so the reason that came up was in my own department, it's just getting to where you don't feel, you're open to people. Okay. And this is what Fred Lee was on about. All the years we've been hiring, I've been perfectly willing to consider neoclassical candidates, but the neoclassicals aren't willing to consider people that aren't neoclassical. And that's why our department has become more and more neoclassical. We have one Austrian woman who, by the way, is one of the nicest, kindest people in the world. We had a personnel issue last year, and so we had HR had to come in, and we all had to take these personality tests. Her little dot was so much on top of mine in terms of our personalities that I couldn't read my own name. So apparently there are some overlaps with Austrians, but she's a wonderful person, but she's our only other mainstream person other than folks like me who are getting close to retirement. And I guess maybe Galbraith is right that our answer isn't in the economics discipline. It's in things like what you guys are doing, educating people about, and especially in the context of climate. Because I tell you, I've been working on this article over here on Keynes's theory of investment, and I literally feel guilty when I type stuff like, we increase investment, that'll increase the level of economic activity. Oh, yeah, that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, it is in the context of what I'm writing, but I'm just leaving it there for now.
Yeah, this is, I guess, a couple of people have mentioned this in the chat, and perhaps a good quote to kind of wrap up with or round off with is from Carol here. She says, a good start would be for economics to count the cost to society and the environment, which our current system fails to do.
No, they claim to do it, but they in fact, it goes back to uncertainty. We don't really even understand the costs we're imposing on ourselves in the future.
Right. That's what, and I've forgotten his name already. Oh, Richard Norgard kept saying, he says, it is so complicated. We don't really know how these things are going to interact. We're doing our best, but we don't even know how they're going to really interact with each other. So that reminded me of something else. What was it?
Well, I'm not sure we're doing our best, but we think we're doing our best.
Yeah. See, Gabby mentioned the, I forgot. Couldn't have been important.
Couldn't have been important. Darren says he now replaces words like economic growth with prosperity.
See, and the whole degrowth thing, I had never really read much about that. It made so much sense to me, and it fits so nicely with the job guarantee. The book, my forthcoming book on business cycles, it's very much an MMT book, but I don't mention MMT until chapter 5, because part of my strategy is I want you to understand how the macroeconomy works and be wondering after chapter 4, crap, what can we do? And then just sort of bring it in at the end. It's like, well, this is what we could do. And by the way, there's a name for it. And I had Paulina Chernover read the chapter for me and Randy Ray read it for me. One of the places where he made me replace MMT with modern money theory. But just one of the most frustrating things is that we have the resources and the tools to solve the problem. And well, this goes back to institutionalism, doesn't it? The ceremonial values and the instrumental values and how they're interacting and how we can't actually come up with these instrumental solutions because of the power structure. Power, by the way, there was a fantastic article or chapter in a book that Rob Garnett and I put together many years ago from an ICAPE conference, The Lamentable Absence of Power in Neoclassical Economics, all about how neoclassical economics, power is not an issue because there's competition. So power is never really a big deal. Oh my God, can you imagine trying to do sociology without the concept of power? Anyway, I try to be kind about neoclassical economics, but I also feel like it's responsible for Donald Trump, for the destruction of the planet, for so many things. So anyway.
I would like to do another Mark Diesendorf plug at this stage. Mark, what is the name of your excellent book that you did with Rod Taylor?
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, well, the main theme of the book, the book is called The Path to a Sustainable Civilization. And the main theme is, in fact, power structure. It's state capture by very powerful vested interests, whether they be the fossil fuel industry and the nuclear industry, the property industry, the gambling industry. And really, I've come to the conclusion that we have to tackle the methods used for state capture by these very powerful vested interests. And these methods are very obvious, but the environmental and social justice and human rights movements have not so far given them enough attention. Methods like political donations, electoral expenditure, revolving door jobs between political decision makers and vested interests, concentrated media ownership, which we suffer from enormously in Australia, with the Murdoch capturing most of our media, and it goes on. And as a follow-up to our book, I've been campaigning both in articles and in talks around the country here to try and bring together environmental organizations and social justice organizations and peace organizations, because the military-industrial complex is so powerful, particularly the US military-industrial complex in Australia, to bring them together to actually start a campaign to tackle these tools used for state capture. And across all these tools, I see neoclassical economics as basically giving the imprimatur to state capture, giving that support, whether it's support simply by claiming that the market handles everything. And that's a very important claim, because the market, as we all know, is not a free market. It's controlled by the 1% or the 0.1%. So that's where I'm at present. Tilting at windmills is the wrong metaphor here, because I'm
No, we love
people.
windmills. They're awesome.
I was one of the developers of wind power research in Australia. but tilting certainly at fossil fuel and nuclear power, and that's a very difficult campaign.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I think that feeds back to what we've been talking about with John today. If you do have a pluralist approach to economics, and if you at least don't privilege neoclassical economics.
Well, and may I say, even if we're not successful right now in pushing for what we think is going to fix things, we got to keep the ideas alive. I remember that I went to a lunch as a graduate student, and Paul Davidson was there, and Alfred Eichner, another great economist, and Ann Mayhew and Terry Neal. And the conversation soon turned to, remember back when we thought we could change the world and we didn't? And I thought, I'm just starting out. I don't want to hear that. But they kept the ideas alive. They passed it on to another generation. I don't know if we're going to fix things or not, but even when we're under siege and everything looks terrible, we have to keep the ideas. And so I guess I'm saying I need to get the Cowboy Economist off of his horse and in front of the camera again, so that we can help push forward.
Thank you so much, John. And with the help of John and other people too, that's what we're about more generally. And also, I dream of discovering another Stephanie Kelton or another Kate Raworth or Jason Hickel or Scott Fulwiler, even, or John Harvey or Mark Diesendorf on our courses, to keep it going well beyond when all of us of our generation are not around anymore. That's the least of our responsibilities. We can, at the very least, do that.
And then we can go to if we move to Ireland, you're all welcome to come to my local pub and hang out with me.
Well, careful. We all turn up.
Australia's pretty nice too, just saying.
I have cousins. I have cousins in Brisbane.
Right.
So my Irish family split up, and some of them went to Australia. So, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. May the force be with you, and may the force be with all of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. What a brilliant session. Thank you so much.